Answer 4 questions as a part of the presentation tonight, okay? The first one is, why a TRE? The second one is who decided? The third question is, what will we do with the funds that are raised? And the fourth question is, what are the implications if the TRE doesn't pass? Okay? So, let's start here. Let me frame the conversation, if I can, with our goal as a district. And this starts with the Board of Trustees, to Dr. Stone and her staff, to Mr. Evans, to the teachers. Our goal is, and one of the best things about being a school board member, is the last official act that your children have as an RISD student after 13 years, is that we hand them their diploma, shake their hand, they walk across the stage, down the steps, and into the rest of their life. And our goal is twofold. One is that all students graduate having either earned a seat at the college or university of their choice, or they enter the workforce in a career that pays them a living wage via a license or certification. And what I want to share with you is that we have done that in a fiscally responsible manner. We are one of only 7 Texas Financial Honor Roll districts out of 1,031 across the state. We have the highest rating from the Texas Comptroller since 2002 for 16 years running, and we have a AA+, AAA bond rating. And that's important because there are only 4 districts out of that 1,031 that have that rating: Houston, Austin, Plano, and Richardson. So we educate children with distinction in a fiscally responsible manner. So let's set the stage and what is a tax ratification election first. And I think it's important to look at what composes or comprises your school taxes, because they're different from city and county taxes. We basically have 2 buckets or 2 individual tax rates, and I'm going to equate this to your household account. The first one is a maintenance and operations tax, and for us that's at $1.04. For you, that's your household account. You pay your mortgage, you pay your utilities, you pay for your gas and transportation, you pay for your groceries and your monthly recurring expenses. For us, out of that recurring funds comes salaries, hiring people, programs, utilities. You may know that this year that we brought transportation in-house, so now we do bus transportation. Our challenge is our deficit at the $1.04 tax rate over the next 5 years will rise to $54 million as state funding continues to decline. So here's the next logical question that you may be asking yourself, and that is this: I am paying more in school property taxes. Doesn't that mean that the school district has more money? And this is when I was talking about the brokenness of school finance. And the answer is no. Because for sustaining revenue, as your school property taxes increase, we get the use of the property tax increase dollars one time, and then the next year, our state funding decreases. And that's what it looks like. So what this chart is telling you, and this is based on property value growth, okay? Not only in Richardson, but statewide, but you look at our example, is in 2016, our share of funding public education here in Richardson ISD was about 60%, and the state share was 40%. As property value grows, this year our share will go up to 75%, the state's contribution will drop to 25%, and within 5 years we're projecting that local share will be 85% based on property value growth, and the state's contribution will be down to 15%. So as property values go up, our state aid goes down. And that there's only 2 ways for us to get an increase and more revenue, is to either increase our tax rate, which then brings in recapture, which we'll talk about in a moment, or hope for legislative change. And one of the things I want to share with you in the 12 years that I've been on the board, along with my colleagues on the board, we have been down in Austin lobbying our legislators for increased support in fixing school finance. And we were promised out of the last legislative session, the House had voted to give us $541 million additional, and the Senate voted it down. But they said, we're going to take care of you in the next legislative session. Well, 2 things have happened subsequent to the last legislative session. The first was Hurricane Harvey, And there's over 300 districts in South Texas that are going to need additional financial support. And the second thing was the tragic shooting at Santa Fe High School, which means there's going to be more dollars that are going to be allocated to safety coming out of this legislative session. So if that's why the TRE, the second question is, who decided? So last November, Dr. Stone, our superintendent, called for a strategic planning initiative where we would go out and plan for the district for the next 5 years. And over 300 community members, parents, teachers, students, business leaders. Was there anyone in this room that participated? I know in the back, I see Kate and Tiffany, participated in that process. And we looked at all the cross-functional departments across the district. We looked at curriculum, instruction, facilities. We looked at equity, communications. I served on the finance committee. In the finance committee, we had 3 charges. Our first one was to analyze our district finances. The second was to compare ourselves or benchmark ourselves to our surrounding districts that we compete with. And the third one was to make recommendations back to the strategic finance team, back to the strategic team, and then to the board of, ultimately to the board of trustees. So these were our conclusions. The first one is that the operating spending per student in Richardson ISD versus our neighboring districts is about $438 less than our districts that we compete with. And on an annual basis, that represents about $17 million less that we have in sustainable revenue that goes to teachers and programs. And what the committee found is it wasn't because of our expenses, it was because of their operating tax rate was about 6% higher on average than Richardson's. On average, they're at $1.10 and we're at $1.04. The third thing that the third conclusion of the committee was this: we can't cut our way out of this. We have cut ourselves, that we're no longer able to cut ourselves out of it, and as a matter of fact, there are areas that we were underinvesting. The fourth conclusion was that the students who come to Richardson ISD come to us with, there's many of them that come to us with challenges. But what we believe in our ISD and what we have always embraced really across the entire district and here in the Pierce area is that all means all, not all means some. But when you look at our kids who come with us with challenges, they're going to need some incremental help. On average, we've got 6% higher English language learners. Our economically disadvantaged is about 6% higher. And let me tell you the challenges that those kids face from poverty. You know, I talked a moment ago about our Accelerating Campus Excellence program for our elementary schools. Carolyn Bouquet and RISD Academy in the Pierce attendance area and Richardson attendance area, those schools are now part of that program, because what we had found is that the passing rate in reading in 3rd grade was about 30%. It's because of the poverty and the challenges they bring. We could no longer intervene and intervention our way to individual success for every student. So we had to make more investments to help those students. Our special ed percentage is about 2% higher. And why? People come here because we do have a good special ed department, and we are committed to meeting the needs of every single student who walks in our door. So what I would tell you is, while this may not look like your elementary school, and I've shared that with people, what this profile, our student profile, looks like is these are the students that we see at junior high and at high school, at North and Park Hill and Pierce. And so what we want to make sure is that every student who walks the halls of our schools is walking on equal footing, and that we raise all boats. So the final conclusion or recommendation from our strategic finance team was that the $4 M&O tax rate does not provide sustainable revenue to meet our operating expenses or for us to accomplish our mission as a school district. And what this chart shows is that these blue bars are our basic expenses. 2019, that is our starting point. We were at about $323 million at the end of last year. Only allowing for a 2% rise because of inflation. If we didn't hire another teacher, if we didn't give another raise, if we didn't invest in another program, you can see where we would be at a $54 million deficit within 5 years. Because at $1.04 revenue, it's not enough for us to make and meet our expenses. Now, the other question that I get, and the board gets besides as property taxes go up, is Can't y'all just cut those administrators and save more money? Well, let's take a look at that for a moment. There's approximately 5,000 staff members in RISD. Why? We're in the people business. Of that, 52% of our staff are teachers. Another 40% are our support staff and our professional staff, our counselors, our librarians, our nurses, our occupational therapists, our speech therapists, our classroom aides, the folks who care for your kids as much as your teachers, child nutrition, custodians, maintenance workers. 1% of our staff, about 68 people, are central administrators. These are the folks that typically you find over at the red brick building at 400 South Greenville. It's Dr. Stone and her staff. But 50 of them are a part of our curriculum instruction department. Why? Because we're in the business of education. That is what we do. We've got another 3% of our staff that are principals and assistant principals, and you may be saying, well, that seems like that's a lot. And it's more than other districts, but why do we have more? Because we have, help me, neighborhood schools. Exactly. So even if we were to cut, let's say for example, we cut every central administrator out of an operating budget of $320 million, of which approximately 90% of that is payroll, is people, we would save about 2.5% of our operating expenses. Not enough for us to accomplish our goal or our mission. So let's talk about what success for all students looks like. We believe that success for all students, and I hope you will too, is that it's dependent upon three things. The first is outstanding teachers. We know, and research tells us, that a student who has a highly effective teacher makes 6 times more academic gains than a student who has a less effective teacher, and that is regardless of their academic preparation or how they come to school. The second thing is small class sizes. You know, for those of us out here who remember our elementary days, if you remember, we would all come into the classroom, we'd shut the door at the teacher, and they painted all of us with the same broad brush, and we were all taught the same way, with the exception of, as I like to say, reading, where if you remember back in the day, you might have been a cardinal, a bluebird, an Oreo. Yes. I never made the cardinals. I never made the cardinals. But what small class sizes does is, remember we talked for a moment, now we know that kids come to us with varying readiness levels, sometimes anywhere from 3 to 5 different readiness levels in a classroom. So we need to make sure that we give individualized instruction and meet the needs of every kiddo. But that comes as a part of small class sizes. Now that may be just, we're talking about elementary, but there's something that's secondary that's just as important. And that is the philosophy we have that our secondary teachers, our junior high and high school teachers, teach 5 of 7 classroom periods. That's not, every district does not do that in North Texas, but that's a point of differentiation. Here at RISD, it does come with a cost, but we believe our teachers need that extra time for planning and meeting the needs of all kids. And then finally, safe and enriching environments. We want our kids to come to school safe. We want them to be in a learning environment that is innovative, that is exciting, that they're fired up to come to school and learn. I will tell you, you're sitting in this fabulous new library that just opened, and I was here last week very early in the morning, and it was a beehive of activity. It was actually loud. There was, learning was a contact sport now in the Pierce Library, and it's great because that's what you want for all kids. So something that's interesting about this slide, I was at a presentation over the Spring Creek area, and one of the folks raised their hand and they said, can't you guys put those signs out in front of the schools like you do in a bond election and say, my school is going to get this, this, and this as a result of the bond election? I said, well, you know, this is a little bit different. But if I were going to put a sign out in front of every school and say the tax ratification equals this, it would be these 3 things, because remember, these are the things that come out of our sustainable revenue: teachers, staff, class sizes, and safe and enriching environments and innovative programs. So let's talk about some of the challenges that we are now facing within each of those. You know, I talked a minute ago about when the state legislature cut funding to public education in 2011. And what was the implication of that at the time? Well, at the time, our staff came to us, and we weren't surprised, and said, don't cut our colleagues. They were teachers. Don't cut our teachers. Don't cut our front office staff. Don't cut our people. Do what you must, board, but don't cut our folks. So here are the three things that we did as a district. Number one, we had a hiring freeze. Number two, we froze our starting salaries. And number three, we didn't give a raise for 2 years. And we've been playing catch up ever since. You can see in the most competitive area in the state for teachers, you can see where we fall out with our teacher turnover rate. The districts where our teachers primarily live and where we compete with the most, the McKinneys, the McKinneys, Plano, Frisco, their average turnover is about 12 to 14%. The average for these districts is 14.6, and we've been at 18.3. 18.3, and this has gone on for a couple of years, and here's the challenge. We have fabulous teachers in our ISD. Many of them have been here for many years, but as our teachers age out and retire, we have to look at how can we be more competitive to attract the best and brightest here to Richardson ISD. Now, you may be saying, well, how can they do that and we can't? This is the tax rates for our neighboring districts. And you can see that many of them have already gone to the $1.17. I just did a check. Wiley went to $1.17 in 2009. Plano went in 2013, Allen in 2011, McKinney in 2013, Irving in 2016, and Carrollton Farmers Branch in 2016. And the other thing I want you to know, and we'll talk about this more in a minute, all of these districts, with the exception of Dallas ISD, have also eliminated their optional homestead exemption. But what you can see here is that when you look at our tax rates, there's two things that stand out. The first is INS is the bond debt. Okay, you look at the districts to the north of us, as I like to say, they have lots of fields of green heather and lavender, and they're continuing to grow, okay? Thus, you've got a higher bond debt because they're building new schools and building new facilities. We're built out. We're not building new schools. So at 35 cents, what we do is what you do with your households, is we're able to revitalize and renovate our school buildings to keep them fresh and invest in capital items. The challenge for us is that maintenance and operating tax rate. Again, neighborhood schools, salaries, being competitive against districts that not only have a high bond tax rate, but they also have a high maintenance and operating tax rate that gives them the sustainable revenue that they need to invest in their teachers and their programs and hiring staff. The second critical need we have, we talked about the three things that impact student success, is small classes and innovative programs. You know, the other outcome or consequence in 2011 was in the 2 years, 2011 and 2012, we had over 500 class size waivers at the time because we froze hiring staff. The second thing we need to do is we do need to address the needs of our special student populations. You saw that we're at about 11% special ed students for two reasons. One is we're committed to meeting the needs of every child. And the second thing is that we believe in mainstreaming our children. And as a result, those students who come to us with special challenges need additional needs and help in the classroom. They need additional help with aides and special ed teachers so that the gen ed classroom teacher can meet their needs, but also the needs of all the other kiddos in their class. And then finally is keeping to invest in the programs that connect the kids beyond the core classes to their school. The CTE and the healthcare and the trade programs that are expensive, our programs like AVID, Advancement via Individual Determination, which now at Pierce High School, I think, Mike, 10% of our students are a part of that. The ACE program, JROTC, those programs that cost more. And then the third is school safety and enriching environments. You know, as not only as a school board member, but as a mother, I never thought that our kids wouldn't feel safe in school. I never thought that we wouldn't feel safe in church or temple, or at a movie theater, or at an outdoor concert. But unfortunately, that is the world that we live in today. And even though the RISD was on the leading edge of school safety, we started double buzz entries in 2006, and now districts to the north of us are just now considering it. We've always done everything we can to keep our students and our teachers safe. But we must conduct a comprehensive school safety audit. And we must do that so that we know that we're doing everything we can to protect our kids and our teachers. We need to enhance our security department, adding school resource officers that go down not for every elementary school, but for our elementary school attendance areas. And then finally, adding campus staff, including a full-time assistant principal at elementary campuses that do not have currently a full-time elementary principal. And in the Pierce area, Prairie Creek, Canyon Creek, Mohawk, if you go down Meandering Way, Spring Creek, Northwood Hills, because here's what happens. We have charged our principals to be the instructional leaders on campus. And as a result, Mr. Evans and his staff are called away from time for conferences, for training, for individual programs. And at the elementary schools that don't have an assistant principal, the school is left under the care of either the counselor, if he or she is there, and if the counselor's not on the school campus grounds, then it goes to the front office staff. It's not safe. It's not safe. We must have administrators on duty in those schools where we don't currently have a full-time assistant principal. So that's, if we talked about the why and the who, here's the what. Here's how the money will be used that we raise. First thing I want you to know, and let's talk about this because I told you there were two reasons that school finance especially is broken. This 13-cent increase will generate about $30 million a year in incremental revenue, and we will net $24.8 million after we pay a recapture payment of $5.9 million, okay? But here's the part of school finance that's illogical. At $1.04, we get $61 million and change from the state in state aid. At $1.17, we get $67 million and change from the state in state aid. We give them $5.9 million, they give the district $5.8 million back. It makes no sense, it is illogical, but that is a part of school finance, and that's one of the reasons that over a third of the districts across the state have gone out for a tax ratification election. So how will we spend these funds? The first is maintaining our current class sizes and programs. A 2.5% raise for teachers and staff, a market adjustment for our hourly wage earners, like our child nutrition, our front office staff, who basically right now are working for benefits. We'll be able to keep our programs like CTE, Fine Arts, and JROTC. One note about fine arts. You know, with our, the way that we have structured our schools, K through 6, versus other districts that go K through 5 and then 6th, 7th, and 8th is junior high, we actually are one of the few districts left that has fine arts in elementary school. Many of your kiddos, I know mine did, took advantage of band, orchestra, and choir. But that comes with a cost. It's expensive, but it's something that's important to us because by the time the kids get here to Pierce, 40% of our kids across this school are participating in fine arts. And then the other thing that we're going to do is we're going to restore the fund balance. The money that we borrowed last year to give the teachers a raise, we will pay back. And then $3 million is going to go to hiring special ed teachers and special ed aides and additional general education teachers. We'll take $3.6 million to expand our academic programs, which is expanding our CTE programs, keeping them fresh, making sure that we're doing what we need to do to prepare our kids for their future, and then implement elements of our strategic plan. You know, I talked earlier that we did a comprehensive strategic plan where we looked at all of the different areas of the district. We want to start being able to implement some of those, including, and something that's very important to the board, which is full day pre-K, which is something that we're going to look at immediately to help bring our kids to where they need to be by the time they get to 3rd grade. And then finally, $1.6 million for safety and security, adding those assistant principals, the security officers, the audits, and implementing safety measures. Now we get a question that says, why can't you guys just go to $1.10 or you go to $1.14? You have to go to $1.17. One of the charges of our finance committee, our strategic finance committee, was to look out 5 years. Okay, so as we looked out 5 years, at $1.10, we could give our teachers a raise, although in the out years it wasn't going to be sustainable. At $1.14, we could give our teachers a raise, we could hire the additional staff, we could invest in our programs and begin to pay back our fund balance. But again, it wasn't going to be sustainable over the 5 years. It was only at $1.17 that the recommendation was made that we could accomplish all of the things that we needed to do in those 3 very critical areas and begin to implement the elements of our strategic plan. So what's the impact on the homeowner? The average home value in RISD is about $289,000. Quite honestly, your house value may be higher, your house value may be a little lower. I'm going to help you in just a moment calculate an easy way for you to calculate what the impact would be to you. But there's a couple of things that I want you to know. The first off is homestead exemptions. Richardson ISD is one of only 3 districts in North Texas, Dallas, Highland Park, and Richardson ISD, that still gives an optional homestead exemption. That 10% homestead exemption is taken off the top of your housing value, and it cost us as a district about $8.3 million a year in lost revenue that we don't get credit for from the state. But this is something that we've done and we have kept to be responsible to our taxpayers. There has been some talk that the board would eliminate the homestead exemption immediately. Let me tell you, when the state legislature passed that $25,000 state homeowners exemption, we are locked into our homestead exemption for a minimum of 5 years. We can't touch our homestead exemption till January of 2020, and that has not been a discussion of the board. It was one of the identifications of sustainable revenue from the Strategic Finance Committee. It was an identification of the revenue, but it was not a recommendation. So the impact to an average homeowner is about $25 a month. And then for those of you, very few in this room, that are 65 or over, your tax levy is frozen. Now, one way that you can calculate your impact on your tax increase is take $100 per $100,000 of your home value. So if you live in a $500,000 home, it's about $500 a year, or roughly $47 a month. So we've talked about why the TRE, we've talked about who decided, we talked about what the funds will be used for. The final thing we have to talk about are the implications of what happens if it doesn't pass. You know, one of the conversations that we had as a board were with our colleagues in Frisco, because, you know, they went out for a tax ratification election 2 years ago, and it didn't pass. And we asked them, we said, what do we need to tell our community? Because we want to be transparent, we want to help them understand, but we don't want to threaten, you know. And they said, you have to tell them the implications, because we didn't open 4 schools for 2 years. We went to pay to play for our athletics and extra and co-curricular. So you need to help your community understand the implications of this not passing. What I will tell you is this board and this staff will always put academic performance of our kids first. But what's going to happen is that we as a board are going to have to come back to you in a meeting very much like this and say, with an operating budget of $320 million and 90% is people, we're going to have to make some tough cuts. And we're going to ask you to help us make those cuts. But these are the initiatives or the areas that we're going to have to look at. Teacher and staff raises and no additional compensation. We know what our teacher and our teacher turnover is right now. A hiring freeze for additional teachers and instructional staff, and the implications for the class size increases. School consolidation. You know, there's a lot of folks, and we have a lot of small schools up in the Pierce attendance area, a lot of small neighborhood schools. But you know what? Those neighborhood schools are important to the families who live there. And as I go out and make this presentation, they're like, well, can't you just close those 2 schools over there? And I'm like, you know, everybody is really willing to close somebody else's school or move somebody else's attendance area line, but don't touch mine. And that's a very important part of what we want to do, but it is inefficient and would have to be up for consideration. We would not be able to, we'd have to look at adding the security personnel or equipment, reduce course offerings. You know, we won't touch English, science, social studies, and math, the core courses, but those specialty courses, the robotics, the career technical education, the ABIDS, the ACE programs, those programs will have to be considered because they are expensive, but they do have a good payoff. And then finally, pay for play for extra and co-curricular programs. You know, pay for play was not a big deal in Frisco because their students are 11% economically disadvantaged. If you go back to that slide that I told you about our kids, 55% roughly of our kids are economically disadvantaged. And pay for play is a game changer for them. Not only for athletics, but it's also for band, choir, orchestra, robotics, the extracurricular clubs, those things that help get our kids to realize their dreams of going on to college, because many of them use that as a way to go. So as we look at this, yes, there are implications, but we will be working with you to work through this because we will have to find $10 to $12 million a year. So that is the tax ratification election. If I had to sum it up for y'all, it would be this, is that the TRE is about two things really. It's about protecting what we have today, but it's also providing the resources we need to propel your students and your children to their academic success in the future. So thank you for being here. The board is grateful that y'all would come and spend your evening with us. We will take questions. If you have cards, if you wouldn't mind holding them up so that we could collect them, that would be wonderful. And so I'm going to ask our superintendent, Dr. Stone, to come forward along with the board, and we're here to answer the questions. If you'll have one mic, guys.